Welcome to our YouTube Bible study. I'm Pastor Michael Walther from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Collinsville, and today we're going to take up the question of cremation. It's a question I get asked a lot, actually more and more, so I thought I'd do a little video on it. There are quite a few nice videos about the topic on YouTube, and most of them take the approach, most Christians, even rabbis, take the approach of cremation is not a sin, but... And I can overlap with a lot of those videos. There's a lot of basic teachings that I'll talk about, but there's one that I'd like to add that I haven't seen anybody really talking about. So in 2020, about 50% of all the people who died had their bodies cremated. And if that trend continues, by the time we get to 2030, we might be up to about 75%. I think most people choose cremation because of economic reasons or environmental reasons. They don't like all of this space being taken up by cemeteries and things like that. I think one of the other reasons, though, that I see as a pastor sometimes, I'm not trying to judge anybody or look into anybody's heart, but I think this is sort of in the background in the minds of some people. And that is, cremation is a way to escape the harsh realities of death. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit more. So first of all, one of the reasons most pastors don't encourage people to be cremated is because of the pattern that we see in the Bible, where burial is the thing. In fact, there's not a single incident in the Bible where a believer is burned. So what do we see? In the Bible, we see people going to some pretty significant lengths and hardships in order to bury their dead. So it starts out really with Abraham buying this cave at Machpelah for his wife Sarah, and eventually he and Isaac and Jacob are all buried there in that cave. Joseph's body was embalmed in Egypt. That was part of the custom of the Egyptians. But then it was carried for 40 years through the Exodus wandering until it could be buried in the Promised Land. One of the most significant cases would be the case of Moses when he died on Mount Nebo, and the Bible tells us that God buried him. So the Bible does present us with all positive examples of burial, and it also gives us some negative examples when it comes to cremation. For example, all of the Baal worshippers some of them were in the habit of burning their children as a human sacrifice. Josiah gathered up the bones of idol worshippers who had worshipped at the altar that Jeroboam had built, and he actually took their bones and burned them. Achan is a fellow that we read about in the book of Joshua. He committed a sin, and he and his family, all of them, were burned as kind of a sign of the sin that he had committed. The important thing about burial is it's a witness, it's a testimony to several important things. One of the things that it's a witness to is that our bodies are good in God's eyes. He created us, and even though sin has come into the world and the physical life is corrupted, the spiritual life is corrupted because of sin, it doesn't make the body inherently an evil or a bad thing. That's what a lot of religions teach. A lot of ancient heresies taught that. And that's one of the things we really want to make sure that we are going to avoid. This idea that the spirit's good, the body's bad. Not that way at all. The Bible tells us that God created our bodies, and the Bible tells us that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that when we die, our bodies will be laid to rest, and we will be raised again on the last day, the resurrection of the body. It's not like we just go to be with Jesus as spirits and then our bodies just dissolve and disappear completely. They do that, and we know that God can bring everything back together. So if a person is cremated, or if their body is blown apart or something like that, or as the book of Revelation says, people who die at sea and their bodies are dissolved in the sea, even they will be raised from the dead by God. But we want to make sure that people see the witness in that, and that we don't give the impression that we think the body is bad, or that we don't believe in the resurrection of the body, or something like that. So whether or not cremation is that much cheaper, it is cheaper, I'm sure, but compared to all the other expenses of your life, I don't know that saving a couple of $1,000s here or there is necessarily something we ought to do just for that almighty dollar. I think the witness to the goodness of, or at least God's consideration of the goodness of the body, and the promise of the resurrection of the body might be worth that extra amount that we would spend. Just as the Bible shows people going to great lengths to take care of their dead and to bury them. Jesus himself was buried, at least for 3 days, in a rich man's tomb, and that's highlighted in the Bible for us. As far as the environment goes, I don't know. Cemeteries are kind of permanent, or at least very long-term, green space. So maybe some burials in cemeteries actually might be helpful to the environment. But that one thing I wanted to mention, this escape from the harsh realities of death, that does concern me a little bit. I see a trend where people they don't want to deal with the dying at all. They don't want to see it. They don't want to be around it. It's as though, okay, I finally reached the end of my life. I'm not going to live. The doctor says I'm not going to live very much longer. So just euthanize me, burn my body, put it in a box, throw it out in the field or something like that. And we have to remember that there's a reason for death. And so God told Adam and Eve that on the day that they disobeyed him and sinned, they would die. So death is a teacher. And when we go through the last stages of life, and they're not pretty. I've been there many, many times in my career as a pastor, but they are part of life. They teach us important things. They show us this is the result of sin. And so this is one of the reasons we look to God for his salvation, for his forgiveness, for the strength of the Holy Spirit to avoid sin and to resist it, and to preach the gospel, that the victory of Christ overcoming sin would be believed. So I think that sometimes going through those experiences of life are helpful. So I definitely favor burial and not cremation. I'm not saying, though, I agree with all the other pastors, I'm not saying that if you are cremated, that's a sin. But I would say that if you are cremated, you should make sure that your family knows your belief in God's view of the body, that it's not a bad thing. And your view also, your belief in the resurrection of the body on the last day. I don't know how you're going to do that. Maybe it's something that should be emphasized. Well, it should really be emphasized in all funeral sermons and messages. But whatever you can do to teach that to your family, I think that's important. Because sometimes these things that we do gradually teach things that we don't want our family to believe. We don't want them to think that the body's not important. We don't want them to stop. We don't want them to, begin denying the resurrection of the body. And we certainly don't want them to fall into this pattern of trying to escape the harsh realities of death and sickness and suffering, and then also miss the point that the Bible makes about the seriousness of sin, and then to think that a little bit of sin's okay. So we want to avoid those things, and whatever you can do to teach your family and your loved ones and your friends about that, that I definitely think is absolutely a must when it comes to what are we going to do with our bodies when we die. So thanks for listening. It's a short one for this evening. Please add any comments, questions that you might have. I'll be glad to try to respond to them. Thanks a lot. Have a great day and a great weekend. Bye.